Now, being able to integrate sources is so important. We love source studies. For the course study, you will be given at least one prescribed source for most of your responses. So in that first section, yeah, you get at least one, and then other times you'll have to talk about two sources in one response, because it literally is a source-based study. So in terms of evidence and being able to integrate the sources, a lot of that evidence is genuinely going to come from the sources, and then you'd want to have like a couple extra details and like own facts or like sources that you know from yourself, or like historian quote here and there. But otherwise, you don't want to go overboard on memorizing too much there, because a lot of it is coming from the sources they've given you. It is a source-based study. Effective integration is not quoting the entire source and then not providing any analysis and leaving it at that. Effective integration is explicit. So, as shown in source A, we're putting on our modern hats, and we're going to be that modern student. Or like source A depicts and it's very analytical. It's not descriptive. So we're going to look at some of those skills. So let's look at this one, guys. We're analyzing this source, Hitler with a child. Let's have a look. I want you guys to think about the different ways that you can analyze this. I can analyze this and just describe what's in the photo, or I can analyze it and use that description to make an analysis and prove a judgment, or prove the nature of what this picture is actually depicting. Let's talk about what I mean. So I could say source A is a photograph taken in Nazi Germany, the salient image being that of Adolf Hitler, the Führer, with a little blonde girl who appears younger than 3. Hitler is smiling, whereas the young girl was a scowl. Well, thanks. I actually couldn't see that. I actually couldn't tell. I don't want to sound mean saying that, but I wanted to show you guys just the difference, because sometimes you don't even realize you're doing it. And I literally did it as well, where it's so easy to see the source and just get into like the describing of it and like what it's showing. But it's very much in English. Can you guys tell that I'm going to be an English teacher? Because for some reason she wants to bring in English to all of history, but English and history are very connected. But same in English, in creative writing, like showing and not telling. That is literally just telling. Like, you're literally just telling me, like, thank you for telling me what my eyes literally saw. Thanks. But instead you could do, source A reveals the way in which Hitler was presented through propaganda in Nazi Germany. Look at how it starts. In order to consolidate the Führer myth, propaganda such as this that depicts Hitler with young Aryan children served to not only humanize the dictator, but also further reinforce the paternalistic image of Hitler, presenting him as the loving father of all Aryan Germans. Please, full marks. Full marks. Can we see the difference? See how they've literally only taken Hitler being the Führer and the blonde girl. Like, they've just taken the actual features of the image and then analyze them. That's the difference with analyzing and describing. And I think that's so important in like the task words as well. Because if it was a describe and it was like, describe what this source shows, which let me just tell you now, you are never going to be asked to describe this source. Because if it was just describe this source, you're just going to describe what's there. But because it is an analyze, and a lot of your sources, like if you're doing any source work, it's source integration and it's an analytical source study. So you're going to have to be analyzing it. These are the types of responses you want to use. And this is how you really want to kind of like structure it, where you want to start with like a general kind of little source A reveals this. And then you want to connect the points. So instead of saying it shows this image of Hitler, the Führer, show how it reveals him as the Führer, and what propaganda and paternalistic image it's presenting. So yeah, that's how to get a band 6 in modern, guys. You're welcome. You can't just take the source at face value. There's a multitude of things that can affect the source's usefulness. And this is where we need to assess perspective and reliability. So analyzing that affects not only how useful it is, but exactly what it can be used for. And we're going to look at that later. But perspective and reliability are two things that we're really going to look at in this section. So perspective is the particular attitude or worldview regarding something, so the perspective that it shows, and the reliability is to which it's accurate or trustworthy. So those are two different things, but a lot of the time it's easy to get them confused, and I feel like I did the exact same thing. I'm not even going to lie. Like, the last thing I want to do in any of my lectures, but especially in modern, is sit here and be like, yeah, perfect grade A modern student. I was on top of my notes 100% of the time, and I did 2 past papers a week and blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm not even going to pretend like I didn't find source work hard. It is hard, and it's definitely a skill that you have to build yourself up to. But you guys just being here, we're manifesting the band 6 that you choose to be here in your holidays. let's look at what can affect perspective and reliability. So there's implicit biases, which are age, gender, nationality, religion, class, profession, education. And then there's explicit biases, which come from like your purpose and your motive of like the source. So the search for rewards, personal prejudices, like to boost support or morale, ideological agendas, and political agendas. And then there's structural factors, like if content is censored, if the source is like complete or incomplete, and like the mythology or mythology, the secondary, if it's a primary or secondary source. Sorry, can't pronounce that word today. Mythology. Method. Anyways, let's pretend that this isn't happening. The one thing I really want to tell you guys, and this is, I feel like this is such like a little hack of modern. If you ever get a like an extract, which always comes up, I feel like, in the HSC or in trials, like you'll get it at least in either trials or HSC. If you ever get an extract and it's asking about the limitations of it, naturally, because it's an extract, it's limited. Even if the extract is 100% true, because it's an extract and it's not the full picture, you can literally, like, hypothetically, maybe the extract is like proving like some like one specific point, but the paragraph after it proves the opposite. But because you've only gotten that extract, you'd think, oh, the source is super reliable in proving this. No, it's not, because you haven't got the full complete picture. So even if the source is perfect, it's not. We need to get this down straight. There is no perfect source. Sometimes you'll see a source and you'll be like, wow, the perspective, it's so reliable. No source is perfect, because all of them consciously or subconsciously are going to be affected by one of these. So let's look at how we can assess the reliability of the source. And you should always aim to have at least 3 reliability tests, but you can do 2. It's up to you. But like the more tests that you can do it, the better you test it. I think that these are some questions that you can ask, and it's just, I like when I would look at a source, I was like, okay, if I ask myself these questions, then I could see how reliable it was. So was the source produced in close proximity, time or place to the event? So that's very important. That also judges whether it's a primary or secondary source. Going back to year 7 history, guys. Was it produced by someone involved in the event? Was it produced to be published? Was it produced for personal, political, ideological, educational, entertainment purposes? Is it an extract? Was it the product of extensive research, and was it peer reviewed? All of these are going to affect the reliability. So I think that memorizing just a couple of them, I know there's already so much to learn in modern, but just having a few of these memorized means that you can apply it to so many different questions, so many different practices, your trials, your HSC. It's just one skill. Even if you want to put them on a flashcard and just have one flashcard, and it can just be called reliability test. And maybe the first couple of times you try out like practice questions for source answers, if you have that flashcard next to you, and there's also nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with having some notes next to you and doing like practice responses with them there. Obviously, that's not the final way you want to be studying, but like as you're first starting to get into practice responses, don't think that there's anything wrong with having your notes and practicing how to structure them and respond to them there. You can always use it as a starter and build into it. Don't think, oh, I'm gonna go on another rant, because I don't like that there's just this one ideal way that you have to study, and if you don't study this way, you're failing. No, it's not true. Fake news. I've had enough of it. It's fine to start that way. Do not feel guilty, and don't make anyone make you think that that's, not effective. That as a starting method, just as like typing notes and copying them, or like using other people's notes, or like, we're literally called ATAR notes. Like our company is ATAR notes, and we have those textbooks, which are all just notes, which I'm going to admit, I had the books and I was writing a lot of the notes word for word. Personally, there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that. Enough. I will not rant about this any longer, but guys, I'm against it. I'm on an agenda. I have a personal purpose and a personal agenda against this. But yeah, if you guys have that flashcard, and again, if you're struggling to memorize them, or even if you want to look at some sources, or like look at some online, and then have that flashcard and think, okay, was it produced for political purposes? Is it an extract? And you can ask yourself those questions. As you get the answers to those questions, that's your answer. That's your assessment. That's literally your response, is your answer to these questions. So these questions can naturally answer most, if not all, of the source questions that you're going to get. So let's do a little test. So we've got this source. Is your washroom breeding Bolsheviks? So we've got, what is the source? What is the context of the source? What is the purpose motive of the source? And do you think the source is reliable? We've got, these are the questions that you can ask, and they come from these reliability tests, which are really important. But it's got the key quotes: employees lose respect for a company that fails to provide decent facilities for their comfort. Try wiping your hands 6 days a week on harsh, cheap paper towels or awkward, unsanitary roller towels, and maybe you too would grumble. So that's where you can look at, especially these quotes, and question the purpose or the motive of where they're coming from, but also just the context of them. So let's look at the difference. If the question was, how reliable is the source in reflecting American attitudes towards communism in the 1930s? That changes the question. Does it not? Does it not? That changes the nature of the question in comparison to just looking at the source. And that's why the question and what they're asking you about the source is so important. And I think that doing like practice questions and past sections is so important, because naturally you're answering the source in relation to the question. I can look at this source and ask anything and say anything about the source, but if it's about a specific attitude, or it's about, and this one specifically reflecting American attitudes, then it's going to be different to a normal response about what this source or like an analysis of this source. So naturally the answer is going to be based on the specific questioning of the question. So this is where factual reliability and reliability as evidence comes in, and they are different. So factual reliability is whether or not the content of the source is factually accurate and can be collaborated by other facts, statistics, and sources relevant to the events, issues in question. While reliability as evidence is whether or not the content of the source, irrespective of its factual accuracy, can be used as evidence of attitudes, beliefs, and agendas at the time of those producing the source and their audience, is the fact that the source is biased. So it's like, is bias a good thing? And I think the way that history is kind of taught, especially throughout year 7 to 10, we're always taught that bias is bad. I'm going to look at this about like a bit, but as reliability for evidence, bias isn't necessarily bad because it shows you that attitude and that perspective better. So when we look at this source, factually, it's unreliable because US workers are not becoming radicalized because their tissues aren't too high. And the Scott's Tissues Tower objective is to sell tissues, not to provide a factually accurate amount of Marxist influence amongst worker space in the US. But as evidence, it's highly reliable of the fact that US attitudes towards communism at this time were negative, and that the fear of communism was high, corroborated by the Red Scare and Reds under the bed rhetoric. So as a reflection of this question and of this perspective, it's highly reliable, but factually it's not. But as evidence it is. So I hope you guys can see the difference of that. And I think as soon as I started to understand the differences between both, I feel like it was much easier to just answer questions, because it was so easy to just look at the factual reliability. But then I felt like I was limiting myself in answers, because a lot of the time, even though they're factually unreliable because of the bias in them, or like the implicit bias, whatever it was dealing with, that bias actually shows the evidence of attitudes and their beliefs and their agendas. So it's like two-sided. Again, in history, nothing is perfect, no source is perfect, and nothing is like 100% agree or disagree. There's always going to be other sides. So I think having this mindset and being able to distinguish between the two will help you in your marks. So bias is one of the most overused and misunderstood words in HSC history, and it's not your fault, because from year 7 to 10 and even onwards, you're taught that bias is bad. But I'm biased, you're biased, we're all biased, whether we want to admit it or not, and a lot of us are implicitly and explicitly biased, you don't even realize. But bias isn't synonymous with, can I speak English there? With unreliability or usefulness. So bias isn't inherently a bad thing, and in some cases it even makes the source even more useful. So don't make generalized statements like this source isn't effective because of its bias against this. Okay, what do you mean by that? Because it is bias against that, you can say, instead of bias, you can say the underlying ideology, or you can say the bias signifies the underlying political agenda or the underlying personal prejudice, which actually makes it reliable as evidence towards those ideologies, towards their attitude, towards the beliefs of that side, which helps you understand that side of the history, or that person or that party, etc. So let's just understand that bias is bad, guys. Let's move on. Integrating your own knowledge is also super important. So this includes non-prescribed sources and general detail info. And it's very easy to over rely on the prescribed scores. And this is what I was talking about before, where if you only rely on the source, you mainly do need to rely on the source, but you do want to be bringing in your other details. And if you're just talking about the source and just like all your evidence is the source, it'll really come out in your marks. So for example, I just want to show it this way. We've got outline the economic transformation of the USSR under Stalin. And this was the prescribed source, which is discipline in the collective farms, and it's got the tax strength and working. If you talked about this and it was the economic transformation of the USSR under Stalin, if you guys have done this point and you guys are doing Russia as your national case study, you'd know that economic transformation is collectivization, but the other half of it is industrialization. So you wouldn't even get the full marks on this question, even if you analyze this source to a T, because naturally you're missing the other 50% of economic transformation, even though it's a source question. So I wanted to put this in because if you're not looking at the whole picture, naturally you're not going to get all the marks. And a lot of the time, because it is the source study and there's so much focus on sources, it's really easy to be like, okay, I don't need any historian quotes. I don't need any general details or information. I'll just go in on the day. And I knew people in my class who were like this, who were like, oh no, but it's all based on the sources. So like, I'm just going to go in and like write about the sources. That's not enough, because the sources have to be paired with like knowledge that you're learning from class. There's no point that they're going to teach that whole core study unit and then you're not going to need any of it. So let's look at this one. As shown in source A, a Soviet propaganda poster from 1933, collective farms introduced under Stalin's policy of collectivization under the 5-year plans radically altered the economic landscape of the USSR, with approximately 91% of all agricultural land collectivized by the early 1930s. Furthermore, industrialization was another major focus of the 5-year plans and Stalin's economic transformation, as evidenced by Stalin's statement. And then it's got a quote. When you look at the difference there, that's got reference to the source, but it's also looking at the other half of it, which has nothing to do with the source, but is still the answer to the question. So that's just an example of how you need to still bring in other points, and it can't just over reliance on the over-reliance on the source. I don't know where I'm thinking. Over-reliance on the source and not enough on the actual detail and things you're learning from class. So let's look at this one. Using source A and your own knowledge, outline the flaws of the Weimar Constitution. You best believe I put this in for you guys out of my own struggle to remember Weimar Constitution. We've got this this source. And before I hear anything, it's an extract. So what does that mean? What does that mean? Naturally, it's not true. But yeah, I wanted to put this in just so you guys, I thought I put an answer to this that we could try it together, but because we've done a lot together, I guess you guys can write some of these in the chat and I'll respond to them in the chat. I'm gonna let go of your hands, guys. I'm not holding your hand anymore. I'm letting go. If you guys want to have a read through this source and leave any you don't even have to answer it in full marks, even if you want to just outline some of the flaws that it's talking about. And if you want to practice linking that to some details that you already know, I am happy to give you guys some feedback on that. So there were flaws. The Constitution had no steering preamble that laid out a vision of a democratic Germany. The proportional voting system contributed mightily to the political fragmentation of Weimar, so on and so on. So if you guys want to have a little read of it, I'll give you guys a minute and we will get moving on. Okay, I'm hoping some of you guys are leaving stuff in the live chat. Okay, let's